In Malaysia, or I think some parts of the world, we have a problem opening up to people naturally, you know, about our griefs, our issues, our problems and things like that. How was it the first time? Was it tough for you to open up about how you were feeling with the loss of your dad and everything?
You know, so it was, I welcomed it. I actually, for me, because no one had ever asked, it was a relief to finally talk about this thing that had been bottled up inside. To be able to talk about what my father meant to me, what he was like as a person and as a dad, all the feelings, you know, how sad I felt, how scared and lonely I felt. For me, it was a relief. But I was a young adult. You know, I think for teenagers, it can be a little bit more difficult to talk to an adult, which is why here at Imagine, we have peer support groups. So teens are with other teenagers who've had someone die, so they feel less alone and less different. Same thing with the adults. Being in a group with other people who've had a loss makes it much easier to talk, even if you're not naturally inclined to do so. So it sounds like in your culture, your society, it's not really what people do. And I mean, it's really not what we do here necessarily in the US or the West. You know, we live in a death-denying, grief-avoiding culture. Okay. And that's one of the things we're trying to change. You know, you get together, we do tours of Imagine 3 times a month, and it's always a circle of people, about 10 people. Everybody has a chance to name a loss they've had. And it never fails that everybody is walking around like walking wounded, that we all have loss, right, but we never get to talk about it.
All right.
And we're trying to normalize grief. We're trying to help people have conversations about grief and death and dying, because it's not something we naturally do. And it's not something that we naturally ask people about. So we're trying to educate people to say to others who've had a loss, how are you doing? Tell me about your husband. Tell me about your dad. To open the door, to issue an invitation to say, tell me about them. The reason here at Imagine we have elephants in every room is because here at Imagine we talk about the elephant in a room, because out there in the world it tends to be avoided. People are scared to talk to someone who's grieving and they avoid them. So we're trying to normalize it and say there's no reason to be scared. You don't have to worry about what to say. Your job is really to listen.
You have set up Imagine. You've mentioned to us about what Imagine does a little bit, but what prompted you to set up Imagine? I mean, besides just you going through your personal experience with grief, what prompted you to set up Imagine?
Yeah, so I was working in the corporate world for 14 years. I was at Prudential Financial, and part of my job was managing their volunteer programs. I learned about this organization that provided grief support, and I was blown away that such a thing existed. And I realized I wanted to work in this field, so I left my job to work full-time in the field of children's grief support, because I wanted to make available to other kids what wasn't available when I was a kid. I wanted to ensure that other children didn't lose years of their life to unresolved grief, and that the parents of the kids got support. So my mom was grieving enormously. She just lost her best friend, the love of her life, and she had to go to work and leave. She loved being a homemaker. And, you know, she was overwhelmed with what was on her plate, plus grieving. And less, you know, able to help her kids. So when you have if we had only had a center like this where she could get support, where we could get support. So what really inspired me to do it was I really wanted to, you know, work for a different bottom line. I wanted to make a difference in the world. And when I discovered that there was such a thing as support for grieving children, it was sort of like I was just compelled to do it. It was just like moved to do it.
Right, and I think it's great with what you're doing, because it creates awareness, getting more and more people to learn about dealing with grieving, especially in children. But I guess the most important thing to address is moving on after that death happens. Can you tell us why it's important for a child to learn how to grieve?
Yes, so grief are the natural, normal feelings you have. So there's no choice about whether you're going to grieve. If you love or value someone or something and you lose it, you will grieve. It's how we're designed as human beings. What adults' job is to help their children learn how to mourn. And mourning is talking about it, if you're old enough to talk. Also expressing yourself. You can put out crayons and help them to express themselves through art and clay and paint and crayons, and through their play. So children's work is done through play. It's how they process everything in their lives. They basically need it to survive. And so if a child is very young, you would want to put out some toys and games, and then follow their lead. Basically listen to what they're telling you symbolically through their play. And you want to just give them opportunities to express themselves. And one of the best ways adults can do that is by being a role model, is by naming feelings themselves. Like, mommy's feeling sad because, grandpa died. And I'm feeling, and you can cry in front of them. What we encourage adults not to do, though, is like to really become completely overwhelmed. And that's what, maybe you need to do in private or with a therapist, with your best friend. But with your kids, you want to show them your natural emotions and then role model for them the healthy ways you cope. So mommy's going to go for a walk outside. Do you want to come with her? Because I'm feeling like I'm missing grandpa. Mommy's feeling sad, or daddy's feeling sad. And that's okay. We want to also let kids know that feelings aren't good or bad. They're just feelings, right. And they come and they go. We're going to write in our journal now to get down all our feelings, or mommy's going to talk to a friend. And so, there's ways that adults can be role models for how to cope with difficult feelings.
All right. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to notice those differences in our children. What should we be looking out for? Like me, the parent, what should I be looking out for when I'm looking at my son?
Yeah, one of the things we say is look at children's behavior. Behavior is basically information. We don't say that there's good behavior or bad behavior. It's just information. And if behavior changes, that's really what you should be paying attention to. So if you have a child who was once outgoing and really, talkative and just expressive, who's now kind of withdrawn and kind of silent, you're like, okay, something's up, something's going on. So I need to give an invitation to talk, or to tell me, how's it going? What's going on? I've noticed that you seem much more quiet lately. So a change in behavior. It could be also physical, like trouble getting a lot of tummy aches or headaches, trouble sleeping. Younger children may regress. So they may go back to sucking their thumb, to wanting to sleep in your bed if they don't typically do that, sometimes wetting the bed. And it's really looking for that change in behavior, becoming much more withdrawn or starting to act out. So whether it's, little kids sort of starting to fight on the playground, schoolwork is also another key indicator. When something changes in how a child is doing in school, that's information. It's like, why was my kid who was doing great in school all of a sudden not doing his homework or not paying attention? And I'm hearing from the teacher, the grades are not doing well. So, that's one of there's a lot of different signs. And the key thing is, has something changed in the way you know your child best, in the way that they usually are? Then, you want to give them an opportunity, if you don't have a grief support center near you. And sometimes if a parent is grieving as well, to think about who are the other adults in that child's life. Is there a teacher, a guidance counselor, an uncle or an aunt who that child feels safe with? Because often kids won't talk to their parent because they don't want to make their parent more sad. And often parents then won't talk to the kids. They don't want to make the kids more sad, so then nobody ends up talking in the family. That's the beauty of coming to a place like Imagine, is the whole family comes together and there's an invitation to talk together. So I would say to adults, if you find your child is not, talking to you, especially if they're older, make sure they have, the key thing to how well a child does after a loss is to have at least one healthy, functional adult in their life who sees them, who knows to pay attention and to listen to them. Ideally, more than one. So, we just say, think about who are the other adults that can be that safe person for my child.